it's Tori. Whoa, welcome back to my channel. It's winter and it's really cold outside. It is -1 degrees Fahrenheit outside my house right now because I live in Minnesota and it's basically the Arctic here. So I thought it would be the perfect time to sit down and give you guys some winter fantasy recommendations as you're setting up your TBR for the coldest months of the year. Unless you're on the opposite side of the globe, in which case these are now summer reads, I guess, so we'll just roll with it. So I went through my shelves and I picked out 10 books and I arranged them from the most cozy to the least cozy. We're gonna start with the most cozy and we're gonna slowly mosey our way through to the lesser cozy reads. We're gonna start out with the most cozy read on this list, and that is Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to the Care and Feeding of British Dragons. This is a very adorable, soft, fantasy and magic book about a middle-aged spinster who's living with her sister and kind of acting as the unpaid governess for her sister's children. And she lives in a kind of Regency-era village. And all of a sudden, she receives her inheritance from a great uncle that she really didn't know that well, but he sends her this chest of oddities, amongst which she finds a dragon egg. And what I love so much about this book is that it is so cozy and sweet, and also has just enough tension to pull you into a page-turning read. It is so much fun. The character of Mildred, who is our protagonist in this story, honestly, fantasy needs more protagonists like Mildred. She's delightful. And the dragon antics that ensue, because of course you have a dragon egg, it's gonna hatch, right? It is the perfect amount of cozy with a little bit of adventure. It honestly gives some almost Hobbit vibes where you have a unsuspecting heroine who's thrown out the door on an adventure she never saw coming, and I think that this is the perfect cozy winter read. Miss Percy's Pocket Guide is also the first book in a trilogy, so if you have a wonderful time with book 1, you can follow it up with book 2 and book 3. Next up, I have Quaint Creatures, Magical and Mundane by Andrew D. Meredith. This is a short little cozy mystery-esque fantasy book that features a protagonist named Norik Softstep. Norik is a giant and he runs a veterinary clinic for all of the weird and wonderful creatures that are owned by the characters of this town that he lives in. Now, Norik used to be a dungeon inspector, and throughout the story some things happen, some mysteries, some tension happening in the town, and Norik is pulled back into his old job as a dungeon inspector. This gives cozy D&D vibes. There's a whole bunch of delightful fantasy creatures in this story. Despite the fact that it's set in a fantasy city, it does give some wonderful small town vibes, and there's a cast of wonderful characters in this story. I think this standalone cozy fantasy is perfect for winter reading, especially if you're looking for something that's a little bit lighter. Now, I know that most of you have probably already read this, but I didn't until this past year in 2024, so I thought it was worth a mention because if you haven't read this book already, this is honestly such a perfect winter fantasy read, and that is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. So if you are looking to cozy up in front of your metaphorical or literal hearth and read the story that has captured the hearts of millions of people since it was published, read The Hobbit, because this story is a reluctant hero sent on an adventure, and honestly into an adventure that he is completely unprepared and unqualified for in so many ways, and yet surprises everyone despite it. This is a wonderful cast of characters. It has a very light tone, but also a lot of really cozy and deep themes throughout the story. Bilbo is such an everyman character that so many people can relate to, from having guests show up at your house unannounced and the stress and unpleasantness that that can cause, versus going out on an adventure that you're unprepared for and feeling completely out of your depth. Bilbo is such a wonderful, wonderful protagonist, and if you haven't read The Hobbit yet, or even if you have read it and you're looking to rekindle that nostalgia, please sit down this winter and reread The Hobbit. Next up is A Green and Ancient Light by Frederick S. Durbin. This is a book that I didn't think I was going to enjoy as much as I did. I had a wonderful time with this book. So this book is, dare I say, the film Pan's Labyrinth, but cozy. It doesn't have the darkness or the horror aspects and elements that Pan's Labyrinth had. So if you take that, you make it cozy, and you add in a dash of Narnia, you kind of get a green and ancient light, which is hard, it's hard to explain, but I think that pretty much sums it up. This is the story of a young man who goes to stay with his grandmother, and he discovers that behind her house is this incredible magic garden of statues. And while it plays to his childhood whimsy, there is an actual magic element to this garden, and some of the characters in this story are not what they seem. Now, this young boy and his grandmother discover a downed pilot from the enemy army, and basically have to shield him from unfriendly eyes. And this story is so incredibly wholesome, and I couldn't put it down. It had such a strong atmosphere and whimsy about it that I couldn't help putting it on this list, because I think it is a perfect winter read, and it is also a standalone. So once again, it's a one and done, and it's a really, really beautiful, whimsical read. If you're looking for a little bit more humor in your winter read, I cannot think of an author that I would recommend more highly to you at this point, and everybody who's been following my channel this year will know this is not a shock. I'm going to recommend Guards Guards by Terry Pratchett. This is the first book in his City Watch series. This story follows a hapless motley crew of city watchmen soldiers whose job it is to sort of keep the peace and sort of protect the citizens of the city Ankh-Morpork. Now, these soldiers don't actually expect to have to do any real hard soldiering until the city is under attack by a dragon. Now, Terry Pratchett is the kind of author who gives incredible intelligent humor within his stories, and he knows fantasy to such a degree that he can make fun of it and it's actually funny. He's such a brilliant writer, and this whole series, I'm 4 books into the series now. As you can see, they're not very long. They're quick page turners with incredibly vibrant characters, and I highly recommend, if you're going to experience this series, to try the newer audiobooks that are narrated by John Culshaw, because they are such an experience. I love them so much. I'm not an audiobook listener typically, and they have single-handedly made me a believer in audiobooks. I absolutely love them. Highly recommend Guards Guards by Terry Pratchett, and if you love it, keep going. They can be read as standalone stories, but there is a series about the City Watch specifically, and I cannot recommend these highly enough. Terry Pratchett is one of my newest favorite authors, and I think you will also have a fantastic time with them. If you like British humor, and especially kind of the tone of the Monty Python sketches, Terry Pratchett definitely kind of leans into that flavor of humor, and it's just phenomenal. I think it's really fresh, it's really funny, it's very natural, and I have had the best time reading these books this year. Now, if you had told me a couple years ago that I would read and really enjoy a Lovecraftian cosmic fantasy horror cozy, I would have probably given you a very bombastic side eye. However, that's exactly what I did. The Book of Zog by Alec Hudson. This is, again, a very short standalone, and I loved this book. You have a eldritch horror who wakes up and is kind of learning about himself and where he is and his place in the world, and it has this very sweet undertone, which is weird because you have this cosmic horror being who's like discovering the wonder of the world, and then meets, of course, a motley crew of characters, some of which are other cosmic beings, some of which are worshipped as gods in this world that he's on. And it's so fresh and interesting and fun. I had no idea that a genre blend like this would work as well as it did. But I loved the characters in this story, and I actually think that the cozy elements of it really form the rest of the genre blending. So despite the fact that we have moments of kind of cosmic horror, a little bit of that Lovecraftian vibe, the cozy is really at the heart of it all, because this motley crew of characters has to save the world and the universe, and it's just delightful, and I absolutely think that it deserves its spot on this list. Staying on that line of sort of cozy with a nod to horror, but also adding in a heavy helping of very sweet, mature romance, we're going to recommend Hills of Heather and Bone by K.E. Andrews. This is for my romantics at heart because we have Marana and Percy, who are a lovely, well-balanced, mature marriage couple, which honestly we need more of in fantasy, and they are absolutely adorable. Marana is a necromancer, and she is basically ostracized from large society in the country that they're from. Percy also has magic, but his is more widely accepted. Percy and Marana are forced to go on the run because Marana's gifts are considered incredibly deadly, and there are people who are after her and would love to see her either put behind bars or worse. The way that K.E. Andrews writes necromancy, which is, I think, oftentimes a very dark magic style to work with, and she weaves it so beautifully, and the way that she explores the idea of being able to hear the stories of those already passed on is really beautiful. I think the way that she utilizes the magic gifts of this couple is just brilliant, and I think that this book is a fantastic option for a cozy, slightly tense, slightly horror, but mostly romance read. All right, these last three, we are moving away from the cozy aspect of this list, but these three are still phenomenal winter reads, and I highly recommend them to any of you looking for something to start in the colder months of this year. The first one is going to be The Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan. This is the story of a young boy named Inkwell Featherfield, who is very much in line with Dickensian heroes. He is very sassy, very smart, and often gets into way too much trouble. He's a bit of a scamp, and he runs into a group of people that are notoriously dangerous and is taken in by them when he is running from something very terrible, and starts to discover that maybe these people aren't what everyone thinks they are. What's so amazing about this story is it is an incredible genre blend of Dickensian, epic fantasy, kind of gas lamp. You have a strong found family motley crew in this story. The pacing is very slow burn, and it's going to layer as you go through the story. And this is part of a longer series. Book 4 just came out here in 2024. I love this series. It is one of my absolute favorite new finds of the last couple of years. Book 1 was a self-published fantasy blog off finalist, and I cannot say enough good things about the characters and the atmosphere of this series. So I definitely think that it is an excellent winter series to start if you haven't already. Next up is a read that I absolutely loved this year. It was definitely a little bit more big brain than I usually go with my reads, but I found myself really incredibly drawn in by it. This is a book that everyone always says it's best to go in as blind as possible. So I'm not going to be sharing a ton about this story because I also agree, having read it, that it is the best thing to go in completely blind if you possibly can. But I want to recommend Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. What is amazing about this book is the atmosphere that Susanna Clarke creates. It has cozy moments, but it is not a cozy book. It's very surprising. It will give you twists and turns that will have you completely in awe of her writing style. Her prose is really beautiful, and again, we have a short standalone. This is a perfect cozy up in a blanket read. There's a little bit of mystery. It is a little bit of kind of magical realism. It's a really beautiful story, and I'm so glad that I got to read it this year because it's been on my TBR for a long time. Don't let it stay for a long time on yours. Last but not least on this list is a book that is a standalone. It is technically part of a series that consists of 2 books, but you really can read it as a standalone. And I had such a blast reading this book when I got into it a couple years ago, and that is Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Ames. The reason I put this book on this list is because I love in winter to read a good motley crew adventure story. I'm not sure why, maybe that's just me. If it isn't, let me know down in the comments if you love a cozy motley crew adventure story during the winter. But this book is everything. It is a love letter to all of the elements of fantasy that we all love. This book is based on 1980s rock bands, and Clay Cooper, who is our kind of anchor in the group, he's a has-been mercenary. He used to be a very prolific hero and soldier, but he's retired and he's gone home to just live at his house and to have a relaxing retirement until the front man of his band comes to him and begs for his help to find his daughter. They have to get the band back together. They have to go on a very perilous adventure that honestly most of them are too old and rusty to handle at this point. But the story of camaraderie and the shenanigans of this group, with Clay being the solid anchor in the middle of it, is so incredibly delightful. There's a lot of nostalgia in this book, there's a lot of humor, there's a lot of nods to many of our favorite fantasy stories or creatures or elements, and I think that this is a perfect winter fantasy adventure. So there you go, guys. Those are 10 winter fantasy recommendations from me. I hope that you enjoy any of these you decide to pick up. I'd love to know down in the comments below, not only if you've read any of these and if you enjoyed them, but what books you would recommend to your fellow audience members as winter fantasy reads. Please drop those in your comment because I would love to add even more books to my TBR pile. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. I hope that you all stay cozy and warm this winter and find some new favorite reads, and I will see you in the next video.